My parents decided to give my $75,000 college fund, which my grandpa left for me, to my older sister, Mandy, who's the so-called golden child. They handed it over to her so she could start her own business. In response to this unfairness, I took a stand and sued my parents. As a result, I was kicked out of the house. Now, the truth has come to light, and it seems like karma has struck back hard. I'm 18 years old and currently facing a very challenging time in my life. It's not as if I had it easy before. My life has always been tough, primarily due to my narcissistic parents and the favoritism they showed towards my sister. Mandy, who is now 24, has been the main problem in my life for as long as I can remember. From my earliest childhood memories, I've seen how my parents have always favored her. This bias created a miserable environment for me, leaving me feeling like I was invisible in my own home. While Mandy was not outright mean, she was definitely clever and took advantage of our parents' feelings. She skillfully manipulated situations to get what she wanted. I don't entirely blame her. My parents have set the stage for this. Being the firstborn, Mandy occupies a special place in their hearts. However, I am also their daughter, and I understand that many parents have a favorite child. This is acceptable until it starts making the other child feel unwanted, which is exactly what happened to me. Growing up, I often felt like a spare part in my own family. Most of the clothes I wore were Mandy's old ones, simply because my parents didn't want to waste money on new clothes for me. I could only wear her discarded outfits since they were still in good enough condition. When it came to toys, I often played with whatever Mandy no longer wanted, as my parents saw no use in buying me new ones. The only time I received something new was on Christmas, and that was only because my parents didn't want to appear negligent in front of Grandpa and other guests. I might get one outfit, while Mandy could have as many as she liked. If I ever voiced my discontent, my mom would respond that I should be patient because one day, Mandy's things would come to me. Sure, they would, just as second-hand items. As a child, I accepted this reasoning, but as I grew older, I became frustrated and started causing a fuss about it. Whenever I did voice my complaints, I was met with accusations that we couldn't afford new things, or I was punished for my behavior. I don't recall a single instance where my mom asked me what I wanted to eat or what my favorite meal was. It was always about what Mandy wanted. Whether it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, or any other occasion, family meals revolved around her preferences. There was one time I was so upset that I refused to eat the food on the table and stormed off. For that, my parents grounded me and I had to do all the dishes for a week unless I apologized. Recalling these experiences is exhausting, but it's important to understand the source of this treatment. My mom, particularly, has inherited her own issues from her childhood. She suffered under the rule of narcissistic parents and, in turn, became a narcissistic parent herself. It's a cruel twist of fate. My mom was the eldest of her own siblings and believed that her parents spoiled her younger sister too much. She resolved not to pamper me, the younger child, as a way of balancing things out. It feels as if she projects her own childhood desires onto Mandy, treating her as she wished she had been treated. By the time I finished elementary school, I had grown so resentful towards my parents and Mandy that I started spending summers with my grandpa. He was the only person who truly loved and appreciated me. My grandpa was never fond of my mom, perhaps because he could see through her behavior. He always supported and encouraged me. The year I completed elementary school, Grandpa invited me to his farm for the summer. It was a welcome escape. I had never felt so free and relaxed before. Grandpa spoiled me, granting me everything I asked for. Guilty as charged, I took full advantage of his love and asked for all the things I had longed for: dresses, Barbie dolls, dollhouses, video games, and anything else I might have craved but never received at home. Spending time with him on the farm, surrounded by nature, was a joyful experience. He had a poultry farm and a small stable with 4 or 5 horses. My days were filled with fun and adventure, and I never wanted to leave when the time came to return home. When it was time for me to start high school, I made it clear that I wanted to be admitted to a school near my grandpa's house so that I could live with him. My parents were more than happy to let me go. They saw it as a chance to get rid of me for a while. So, from my freshman year, I moved in with Grandpa. This arrangement turned out to be beneficial for both of us. He was getting older and needed help around the house, and I was looking for a break from my toxic family life. By the time I reached my junior year, Grandpa started to feel unwell. Maybe he sensed that his time was short because he decided to call everyone together for an important meeting. During this gathering, he revealed his will. He left his beloved farm and stable to 2 of my uncles, while my dad received $150,000 in cash savings. Out of that, Grandpa made it clear that $75,000 was set aside specifically for me, to help with my college education. He made me promise that I would use that money to finish my college education. This news did not sit well with my mom. She was upset that my dad got only cash when others received properties and farmland. Grandpa reminded them that my dad had already taken his share of the property long ago, using it to pay off debts and kickstart his own business. Tragically, just as I was starting my senior year at high school, Grandpa passed away. That day was filled with sadness and felt like the worst day of my life. With him gone, I had no other place to go and had to move back in with my parents. It was far from pleasant. In fact, it was a situation that neither my parents nor I enjoyed. As my graduation day approached, I found myself needing to discuss my college funds. I approached my parents about the $75,000 that Grandpa had left me for my education, as I needed to fill out college applications soon. However, every time I broached the subject, my parents would respond with strange looks or completely ignore me. Frustrated, I took a firm stance and asked them directly what was going on with my money. That was when my mom revealed that they had given the money to my sister for her business. I couldn't believe it. That money was specifically meant for my college. They brushed it off, insisting it wasn't a big deal and that I could just wait another year since I was too young to start college. I pushed back against this reasoning, pointing out that my classmates of the same age were preparing to enter college. When they failed to make a decent argument, my parents started pleading with me to give them a year to find a way to pay for my college tuition. I countered, asking why their golden child could not also wait a year before starting her own business. I was adamant, I could not afford to waste a year of my education. A lot happened over the next few months. My parents continued to insist that I wait, but I refused to back down and pressed them for the money. It escalated, and they ended up calling me mean and selfish for being so demanding. I felt like they were trying to gaslight me into believing that I was in the wrong. To make matters worse, my sister Mandy began spreading rumors to paint me as the bad guy. I was devastated when my cousin informed me that she was telling everyone I was just jealous of her business and wanted money out of her. At my breaking point, I threatened to expose the fact that my parents were going against Grandpa's will by giving my college funds to Mandy. My mom exploded with anger, asking if I really wanted to take it that far. She warned me that if I did, I better start paying them rent and for my own meals. She reminded me to calculate everything they had spent on me over the years, saying we were even. I fought back, pointing out how unfair it was that they were still supporting Mandy, who was 24 years old, divorced, and had a child. Meanwhile, they seemed to have no pride in my achievements, even though I had consistently earned good grades. It was hard to understand their favoritism. Mandy had made poor choices. When I was living with Grandpa, she got pregnant by her boyfriend. By the time she found out, it was too late for her to get an abortion. She had to tell my parents, who were understandably disappointed but felt powerless to change the situation. My conservative Christian mother insisted that Mandy marry her boyfriend, despite the fact that they didn't want to. It was a forced marriage, leaving Mandy with no other options. Her boyfriend turned out to be a deadbeat who never wanted to marry or take care of the child. After he abandoned Mandy and their baby, my parents tried to track him down, but he managed to twist the story in his favor, claiming that Mandy had emotionally abused him. The whole situation was messy, and I couldn't help but feel trapped in the fallout of their decisions, with my own needs being pushed aside. He decided to seek a divorce based on specific grounds that were a concern. My parents had to step in and bring Mandy back home after Grandpa passed away. Since that time, they've been taking care of both Mandy and her child. When I returned home, I discovered that it was my mom who ended up raising the child most of the time because Mandy was frequently out. My dad grew increasingly furious with Mandy, questioning why she was leaving her child in our mom's care. In response to Dad's anger, Mom rushed to Mandy's defense, claiming that Mandy was busy trying to secure a job for herself, which is why she was out so much. However, I knew that wasn't entirely accurate. I had seen Mandy many times just hanging around nearby cafes and parks with various guys. Since she dropped out of school, she was having trouble finding a good job. I couldn't really care less about her situation. When she couldn't land a job, she turned to Mom for money to start her own business. Despite all this chaos, my parents continued to support her, handing over money without even consulting me first. I had no idea what options I had to reclaim the money until I finally decided to post about my situation. The next time I requested the funds, my parents pushed back, and that's when I threatened to sue them for violating Grandpa's will. The look on their faces changed immediately. They realized I was no longer the naive girl they could easily manipulate. After I returned from Grandpa's, I began to stand up against their exploitation. I could see the disbelief on their faces when I mentioned the possibility of suing them. I wasn't the gullible little girl anymore. In a sudden fit, Mom grabbed a notepad and started jotting down the monthly expenses they claimed to have spent on me. I watched in disbelief as she included a quarter of the expenses under my name, along with school fees and various other things. It felt surreal as she doodled all this down. Then she concluded by stating that instead of the $75K I was asking for, I apparently owed them $200K. She insisted I pay them that amount before even thinking about my own $75K. This led to a heated argument between us, and I stormed out of the house in frustration. After spending an hour just pacing around the block, I decided to take a bus to my grandpa's house, where my uncle now lived. I needed to get grandpa's diary and find the number of his lawyer. I called up the lawyer and explained everything that had happened. He reassured me that I was entitled to the $75K grandpa left for me. It was his duty to ensure everyone received what was rightfully theirs according to the will. He promised to send an official notice to my parents, stating they had to give me the money. If they didn't comply, I could take legal action against them, which was a huge relief for me. The notice was set to reach them in a week, bringing me some peace, but I was also anxious about how my parents would react once they received it. As expected, I was mentally prepared for their anger, and I had even talked to a friend about possibly sharing a condo with her. I accepted a part-time job at a cafe. Though the pay was low, they allowed me to take leftover food at the end of the day. I had already packed my belongings the day before the lawyer's notice arrived. Just as I anticipated, my mom kicked me out as soon as she got the notice. She yelled at me and threw my stuff out of the house. Looking back, I regretted not moving out sooner and allowing them the satisfaction of kicking me out. My mom called me a snake, implying that I was ungrateful for living off their support while plotting against them. I shouted back that they left me with no good choices and that I wouldn't sacrifice my life and career for their selfishness. The lawyer had given my parents a month to respond to the notice, and I suspected they weren't taking it seriously. Mandy called me, furious at my actions, claiming I was making life difficult for the family. She warned me that my parents had no intention of giving me a dime and that I wouldn't be able to take any legal action since I didn't have the money. I didn't let her know about my plans, I just listened, allowing her words to wash over me until I reached my breaking point and finally hung up on her. I informed my lawyer about Mandy's call, and he confirmed that we could go ahead and sue them if they failed to respond by next week. I experienced a significant backlash from my parents when I decided to sue them. Initially, I didn't want to take such drastic action, as I didn't intend to press any serious charges against them. However, their lack of response left me feeling trapped and with no other options. I thought that simply sending a lawyer's notice would encourage them to comply with the provisions of my grandfather's will, but they ignored this demand completely. When I confronted them about the situation, insisting they follow through with the will, they united against me. They shouted hurtful things, and in a fit of anger, my mom even threw items at me. During that time, I had left some non-essential belongings at home, thinking I could retrieve them later. My mom, in an effort to hurt me further, took one of those items from my closet and destroyed it in front of me, breaking it into tiny pieces. I had originally come home hoping to resolve the issue without involving the legal system, but it seemed my parents were intent on making things much more difficult. Frustrated, I returned to my lawyer and instructed him to file charges against my parents. He did so willingly. When my parents received the court order, they panicked. My dad called me, insisting that we could settle our family issues privately and that we did not need to take the matter to court. I thought I might go back and try to negotiate with them, but when I returned home, they became hostile again, leaving me with no choice but to proceed with the legal action. During court hearings, my father was ordered to pay $75, as was stated in my grandfather's will. However, when faced with this payment, my dad backed down and revealed that he didn't have that amount readily available. Instead, he proposed to pay me $10,000 monthly, but my lawyer argued that this amount would not be enough to cover my college tuition and other necessary expenses. The attorney determined that my father would have to provide financial support for my tuition and living costs, with a minimum total of $75,000. If my spending exceeded that amount, I would be responsible for the excess. Conversely, if my expenses fell short of $75,000, my dad would then owe me the difference. Although I was not thrilled about continuing to rely on my dad for financial assistance, I felt I had no choice. It became evident that he genuinely could not pay $75,000 in one go. I was reluctant to accept this middle ground arrangement, but my dad, with tears in his eyes, made promises that he would not default on the payments. I eventually agreed, but I made it clear that if he or my mom caused any trouble regarding the agreement in the future, I would sue them again, this time seeking compensation for the emotional pain they had caused me. Meanwhile, my mom and sister, Mandy, were spreading gossip behind my back. Mandy told everyone that I was the reason my parents were stressed and that I had brought shame upon our family by taking them to court. It is ironic that they find my actions shameful when Mandy herself had faced serious issues without them labeling her the same way. I had simply asked for what I was owed, and yet, I was branded as the black sheep of the family. At this point, I realized I was okay with that label. It didn't bother me anymore. In my next update, I shared that I had been busy adjusting to my new life in college, which took some time. I graduated high school with excellent grades and sent out invitations for my graduation ceremony, fully aware that my parents would likely not attend. To my surprise, my dad did show up. He seemed genuinely happy, and for the first time, he expressed pride in my achievements. It took him 18 years of conflict and a court case to finally acknowledge me as his daughter and recognize that I needed love and support too. However, I had moved on, and their approval was no longer crucial to me. I had quit my job at the cafe and settled into my college dorm. The financial support from my dad was enough to cover my tuition fees, accommodation, and meals, but I was responsible for any expenses beyond that. To supplement my income, I found a part-time job near campus and started tutoring my classmates in math, a subject I excelled in. Even though I was still dependent on my dad for some financial matters, I felt empowered by taking control of my own situation. I received some inquiries about the status of my relationship with my dad and why he had been absent during my struggles. The truth is, my dad was largely non-existent in my life. He witnessed the difficulties I faced but chose to ignore them, always siding with my mother and her decisions. He believed that whatever actions she took were justified, including using my sister's clothes for me, which was a constant source of humiliation for me. In the end, I realized I was creating my own path, independent of their influence. Throughout my childhood, my mother made it a priority to save money. I often witnessed my father grappling with financial difficulties, which made him keen on finding every possible way to save even the smallest amount of money. In many respects, he was always supportive of my mother's efforts to manage the household finances effectively. There were, however, some things I was unsure of, particularly how my father reacted to my sister Mandy's unexpected pregnancy. The limited information I have about that situation came from talking to cousins and other relatives. Mandy's wedding was conducted in such a private manner that hardly anyone knew about it, not even me. At that time, I was living with my grandfather and was largely indifferent to what was going on at my own house. In contrast, if I were to share my current circumstances, I could confidently say that I am thriving. I am living my dream life, attending college and achieving good grades. My relationship with my father has improved significantly after the legal troubles we faced. Despite the tension, my mother and Mandy attempted to paint me in a negative light, portraying me as the villain of our family drama. However, they eventually had their own problems to confront. Mandy found herself in trouble with the police due to a gambling operation she had secretly established. The money my parents had lent her vanished almost overnight. Mandy had presented her venture as a gaming parlor, but it turned out to be an illegal gambling business. When the authorities intervened, they confiscated all her equipment and machines. My parents had to use whatever little money Mandy had left in her bank account to bail her out of that situation, leaving her with virtually nothing. The way she squandered my grandfather's hard-earned money left me feeling surprisingly satisfied. I didn't feel good about the pressure I placed on my father to get my share of the money. However, the realization that Mandy had not utilized that money for a worthwhile purpose deepened my relief. Instead of investing in something constructive, she misused it to fund her harmful gambling business. After her run-in with law enforcement, my father made the difficult decision to throw her out of the house. Although my mother tried to advocate for Mandy, my father ultimately gave her an ultimatum: it was either him or her daughter. Since my mom didn't work, she chose to stick with my father and told Mandy it was time to find a job and move out. Mandy had been using her child as a means to emotionally sway my father into letting her stay, and for a while, she was successful. However, after the gambling scandal came to light, my father no longer fell for her manipulation and kicked her out for good. Now Mandy is living with a friend, though it's uncertain how long that arrangement will last. She has not reached out to me for assistance, and frankly, I wouldn't expect her to. After everything she and my mother put me through, I feel it's best for her to keep her distance. If she were to approach me, I wouldn't hesitate to remind her of her past actions. Reflecting on my earlier situation brings me to tears. Not long ago, I was in an incredibly difficult position. I had just lost my grandfather, my support system, and my parents had taken away my inheritance. I felt trapped in a household led by my narcissistic parents. At that time, I had worries about my future, feeling engulfed in darkness and helplessness. I am immensely grateful for the support I received from this community during those challenging times. I still miss my grandfather dearly. He is the reason I am able to pursue my college education today. I consider him my guardian angel, watching over me and guiding me from wherever he may be. Moving on to another significant chapter in my life, I faced heartbreak when my ex-wife cheated on me. She ended up drowning in debt from a lavish wedding that I never provided her. Now she has the audacity to ask me for financial help. I am a 49-year-old man, and I met my ex-wife, who is also 49, when we were in our mid-20s. We started as friends and eventually began dating. Our relationship lasted about a year. While that may not seem lengthy in the grander scheme of life, it felt substantial at the time. My ex-wife expressed her desire to get married, and I initially hesitated, wanting to wait a bit longer before making that commitment. Eventually, I felt ready to propose, and she happily accepted. We began planning our wedding, and this is where my instincts should have kicked in, but love often blinds us to red flags. My fiancé wanted an extravagant wedding, and while I understood that it was a momentous occasion, I struggled to comprehend the need to spend a substantial amount of money on just one day. One day, I found a way to persuade my wife to have a small, intimate ceremony for our wedding. At first, she seemed okay with it, and I thought we made a good decision together. However, as the months turned into years, I began to sense that she held some resentment towards me for that choice. The truth is that we were not in a financial position to afford a large wedding at that time. I suggested that we could one day renew our vows and have the grand celebration she had always dreamed of. This idea seemed to bring her some comfort, but deep down, I always felt that the lingering resentment was silently present in our relationship. Although I might not have been the most romantic person, I made an effort to keep the romance alive over the years by doing small, thoughtful things for her. It wasn't that my wife was unaware of this. When we first got married, we didn't have children, so we didn't feel the added pressure that often comes with raising a family. As time went by, almost 2 decades passed, and we found ourselves in our 40s. The spark that once filled our relationship started to fade, particularly over the last year. This realization pushed me to plan a romantic night out to rekindle our connection. I even sought help from my sister, since I never really considered myself to be very romantic. Unfortunately, my efforts did not yield the desired results. My wife didn't come home that night, and when she finally returned, she explained that she had stayed at a friend's house after they had been drinking together. I accepted her explanation without question, assuming it was the right thing to do. The following night, I tried again to create a special evening for us. We enjoyed a pleasant dinner, but when I attempted to initiate intimacy, she brushed me off, saying she was too tired. Once more, I didn't think much of it, we both worked hard, and it made sense that she would be exhausted. This pattern continued for some time, leaving me to question if I should keep believing her excuses. In search of answers, I reached out to her friends to see if she had been spending time with them. To my surprise, they seemed to cover for her. This only intensified my concerns, and I realized I had to confront her about what I suspected. I asked her directly if she was being unfaithful. To my shock, she admitted to everything that night. I was taken aback by her honesty and straightforwardness, as I had prepared myself for a denial or some sort of justification. Instead, she revealed that she was involved with someone else, a family member of one of her friends. It turned out that they had an instant attraction, and he possessed a romantic charm that I had struggled to provide. My wife claimed that our marriage ended that night, marking the beginning of the divorce process. The divorce itself was not filled with bitterness, we both agreed to split everything down the middle. We decided to sell the house and divide the proceeds equally, as it seemed like the best way to move on from one another quickly. Once the divorce was finalized, I used my half of the money to buy a condo. I also managed to set aside a decent amount of money as a nest egg for the future. After the house sold, I put that money away as well, knowing that having savings was essential. Meanwhile, my ex-wife took her share and purchased an even bigger house than the one we had shared. Shortly after, I learned that she was planning a lavish wedding, one that was far grander than our own. Flashbacks of our wedding began to haunt me. I realized that my ex had resented me for all those years because I hadn't given her the wedding she truly desired. Despite feeling embarrassed, I found myself looking at pictures of her new wedding on Facebook. It was truly a grand affair, and everything looked incredibly expensive, making me wonder how much money she had spent on it, especially on the wedding dress. At that point, I understood that I needed to take a step back and stop fixating on my ex-wife. I shifted my focus toward spending time with friends and family, which greatly helped my emotional state. I assumed my ex was moving forward, and it was time for me to do the same as well. I had always assumed that my ex was moving on and enjoying her new life with her new partner and the app she had started. However, I soon discovered that things were not as perfect as they seemed. A year after they got married, I learned they were struggling with debt. My ex had used the money from the divorce settlement to buy an extravagant house and throw an expensive wedding. This left her with very little savings, and while she did have a job that provided a decent income, she was the only one in the household earning a good salary. Her new app, which she had high hopes for, turned out to be a failure. One evening, she reached out to me, asking for a loan. She tried to appeal to the history we shared and the memories we created over our 2 decades together. I wasn't fooled by her plea. I firmly told her that her financial troubles were her responsibility, especially since she had wasted her divorce settlement on unnecessary things. After our conversation, I hung up the phone, but I was not surprised to receive at least 3 more calls from her that same night. In addition, I got 3 very unpleasant voicemails filled with anger and frustration. Upon listening to those messages, I couldn't help but laugh. I even shared them with my friends, showing them how far my ex had fallen since our breakup. They found the voicemails just as amusing as I did. It was clear that my ex had lost all sense of shame or perhaps was just desperate enough to reach out to me for help. I often wondered if she genuinely thought I would consider giving her money. Even if she had contacted me a few months earlier, my answer would have remained the same: I would never have given her anything. That night, I decided to block her number for good. I did not want to hear another word from her. We were finished. She had chosen to cheat and pursue a relationship with someone new, whom she claimed was the love of her life. If she had planned her finances better, perhaps she wouldn't have found herself in this situation. Meanwhile, I continued to manage my finances well. Most of my family and friends were relieved to see her out of my life. I often wondered if they had ever truly liked her or if they simply tried to tolerate her for my sake. In any case, it no longer mattered. My ex had become a part of my past, and that was where she would remain.